have to be kept moving, and drivers have a responsibility to be safe behind the wheel. Forgetting to ensure you have enough fuel is regarded as a failure of this duty, so there's no sympathy from officers if this is what happens. Number 14. Using someone else's Wi-Fi. These days, our lives rely so much on remaining connected. We all get our information from our smartphones, and the internet is considered a basic human necessity in some countries. This doesn't, however, mean that you're allowed to tap into Wi-Fi wherever you are. And if you're caught doing it, you risk being arrested.
It says you're under arrest under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act of 1986.
In 2007, a teenager from Singapore became the first person to be prosecuted under the new Computer Misuse Act after logging into someone else's Wi-Fi so he could play his favorite online game. He was prosecuted for the offense and punished with 18 months probation, during which he was completely banned from accessing the internet in the hope that this would help him kick his addiction. Number 13. Calling someone a horse. We've all been guilty of calling someone else an unfavorable name.
You're a very ill-mannered young man. You know that?
But did you know that in some countries that could land you in jail? In 2019, a British woman in Dubai posted a status update on her Facebook profile that called her ex-partner an idiot and his new wife a horse. This act fell foul of the strict cybercrime laws in the country, and following a complaint, she was arrested by authorities and found herself facing up to 2 years in jail and a fine of up to $70,000. In the end, she was released, but by the time the ordeal was over, she had lost her job and was at risk of being evicted from her home because she hadn't been able to pay rent. Number 12. Using a tanning machine. Tanning salons are a regular feature of high streets around the world. Many people have their own machines at home too. You need to be responsible when using one though, because you could land yourself in hot water. In 2012, a questionable mother allowed her 5-year-old daughter to go into a tanning booth, and the unfortunate girl suffered from second-degree burns as a result. Despite rejecting the accusations, the mother, who clearly regularly enjoyed time in the tanning booth herself, was arrested and charged for child endangerment. This carries a maximum punishment of a fine and potentially jail time, which could have given her ample opportunity to reevaluate her parenting technique. Number 11. Swearing. Swearing is a part of life, and it doesn't take much to make most people utter a word that they wouldn't feel comfortable saying out loud in the presence of their parents.
You guy.
But it seems as if you also need to be aware of where you are and who else might be listening in. In August of 2019, a British man was in an airport in Oman on his way to visit his sick mother. When he heard the news that his flight had been delayed, he apparently muttered a swear word under his breath, apparently in earshot of a policeman, so he was arrested. With an added accusation that he was drunk, he was sent to prison and told he would only be released after paying $35,000. Number 10. Touching someone's hip. If you're in a noisy, packed bar and need to get past someone to buy more drinks or go to the toilet, what do you think the socially acceptable way about doing this is? Most would probably try and gently nudge them aside, but if you do this in the United Arab Emirates, you could find yourself being arrested. This is exactly what happened to a man in 2017, when, to avoid a drink spilling, he placed his hand on another man's hip. This did not go down well at all and resulted in him being arrested and imprisoned for 3 months for public indecency. He lost his job and was left with very little room for appeal, so he had no choice but to wait out his sentence and leave the country on the next flight. Number 9. Using a permanent marker in school. Schools are meant to be a place where children can learn and explore about the world and their surroundings, but it turns out that there is such a thing as a step too far. In 2010, a 13-year-old boy in Oklahoma accidentally broke a little-known law that prohibits people from possessing a permanent marker in public, with the intent that this should reduce incidents of graffiti. He had it on his desk at school, and his teacher noticed that the ink had leaked through a piece of paper and onto the desk. She placed the boy under citizen's arrest and called the police, and when they arrived, she said she had seen the youth writing on the desk with his pen. The police arrested him and took him to a community intervention center, where he was held for a while before being released. Number 8. Accidentally catching a fish. In the UK, sturgeon are regarded as a protected species, and also the property of the Queen, so there are strict rules about who can and can't catch them. In 2004, a fisherman accidentally caught a 9-foot-long, 264-pound specimen and tried to follow the letter of the law by contacting Buckingham Palace to tell them what had happened, and they responded by telling him he could dispose of it in whatever way he deemed fit. He therefore took this as permission to put the fish up for auction. But before it could be sold, it was confiscated by police, and the fisherman was arrested. Apparently, the law he had fallen foul of was by trying to sell it, and if he had instead kept it for himself or given it away for free, then there would have been no charge to answer. Number 7. Food play. Let's face it, everyone has their own weird and strange fantasies.
I'm sitting in here, I'm 14. I got a computer in here, you know?
Most are wise enough to keep them contained within the privacy of their own home. Behaving in a peculiar way outdoors would almost inevitably attract the attention of others and can lead to the police becoming involved. Cops in Kentucky were called in 2012 after a local had smashed the windows of a store while wearing just his boots, then emptied all of the fire extinguishers to spell out the word "sorry" on the floor, before raiding the refrigerators and covering his entire body in peanut butter and chocolate. According to the attending officers, it was the biggest mess they had ever seen, and he was charged with indecent exposure, burglary, and criminal mischief. The charges were dropped in the end once the slightly inebriated man had sobered up, but he was ordered to pay for all the damage he had caused and for all of the food products he had used for his moment of joy. Before we move on, be sure to subscribe to Top 5s with notifications on. Number 6. Wearing camouflage. In many places around the world, camouflage is a perfectly legitimate clothing option for going about your day-to-day business. But there are some countries where it's explicitly illegal to wear because it may give the false impression that you're a member of the military. On New Year's Eve 2016, 7 people were arrested for wearing various camouflage items in Dodoma, Zimbabwe. They were in a nightclub at the time and were somewhat drunk, but it wasn't their behavior that landed them in trouble. Their attire broke the Defense Act and can lead to a lengthy prison sentence and fines. The reason for this, according to the government, was that there had been a spat of crimes against civilians by people pretending to be officers, and the only way they could prevent this was by stopping anyone from wearing military-style uniforms. Number 5. Ruhezeit. Have you ever been frustrated by the amount of noise your neighbor makes?
Because you were being noisy, man, and I tried to get you to stop, and you wouldn't stop. They won't stop partying.
I'm not just talking about playing music late at night, but mowing their lawn early in the morning and having a shower in the evening. As a part of attempts to make communities more enjoyable to live in, some German regions have laws, known as the Ruhezeit, that seek to limit the number of disturbances to give everyone the right to their own peace and tranquility. To make things more difficult, it's not always clearer what the local laws are, and people often fall foul of the rules. During the Ruhezeit, which translate to mean quiet time, residents are strictly prohibited to making any noises that can be heard outside of the home. This includes drilling holes in the wall, exercising, putting bottles into recycling bins, and even switching on your washing machine. The times these laws are in effect are typically between 8 p.m. and 6 a.m., but are different depending on where you are, and neighbors aren't exactly shy about reporting you if you fail to adhere. Normally, on the first offense, you'll just be given a warning, but every year there are always a few people who are arrested and charged and face punishments ranging from a small fine to a few weeks in prison. Number 4. Drinking and walking with a bicycle. Drinking and driving is thankfully prohibited virtually everywhere in the world, and despite concerted campaigns to stop people from doing it, millions are still stopped on the roads each year and punished for being over the limit. Even if you think you're being careful, like sleeping overnight in your car so you can drive sober in the morning, you can still fall foul of the rules. But in 2017, one man fell victim to a 140-year-old law that seems somewhat outdated. He had spent the afternoon cycling around the town of Wigan in the UK with some friends when they stopped off at a local pub for a cold, relaxing beer in the evening sun. Thinking he had had too much to continue cycling home, he instead walked the short route back with his bike, without thinking twice about whether this would be illegal or not. This turned out to be a big mistake, because under a law from 1872, his bicycle was officially classed as a carriage. So after apparently knocking into a parked car, he was arrested for being in control of a vehicle while under the influence. After spending 18 hours in custody, he was charged for the offense and was given the minimum punishment allowed under the law, which was a 3-month conditional discharge. Number 3. Flying a kite. Flying a kite is a pastime enjoyed by millions of people around the world, and is the perfect thing to do on a windy afternoon where you can send it high up into the sky, and depending on how good you are, perform a whole array of tricks. It's not something you can do everywhere though, and in India, there are strict rules governing their use. It might seem like a draconian measure to prevent people from having fun, but the reason for this is due to several accidents that have occurred because of some types of string that are used in their production. If the kite is traveling fast and the string goes up against someone, it can cause deep lacerations and, in some cases, fatalities. So the production, sale, and use of them have been completely outlawed. In 2019, 4,091 people were arrested in the area around Lahore for flying kites, and police confiscated hundreds of kites and spools of string. According to the police commissioner, no leniency would be given to anyone found to be using one, and they threw the full force of the law behind the prosecutions. This led to thousands of steep fines and several imprisonments for those who couldn't afford to pay the penalty, and authorities hope that such a high-profile enforcement of the rules will soon lead to a drastic reduction in the number of people breaking them. Number 2. Sitting on steps. When you've been walking around all day, sometimes the only thing you want to do is sit down somewhere. But if there aren't any chairs available, what would you do? It's not too uncommon to see someone sat on some steps, for example. But because this happens so often, authorities in some cities have begun to crack down on it. One place where they've become particularly strict in recent years is Venice, Italy. In July of 2019, 2 German tourists had visited the usual sites and were feeling exhausted, so they sat down on the steps next to the famous Rialto Bridge and took out their camping stove to make themselves a coffee. Some of the local residents didn't take kindly to this, though, and called the police. You might expect them to have arrived and politely asked the tourists to move along, but the Germans found themselves under the full weight of Italian law. They were handed an on-the-spot fine of 950 euros, which is the equivalent to more than $1,200. And if that wasn't enough, they were ordered to leave the city for good. According to the authorities, they had breached the expected rules of public decorum and respect, and that the tourists had been issued with a so-called DOSPO order, which is usually reserved for unruly sports supporters. With so many visitors traveling there each year, residents and officials in the city have become increasingly concerned about people's behavior at the UNESCO World Heritage Site, with other complaints being picnicking by the canals, diving into the water, washing in fountains, and walking around shirtless or in bikinis. Anyone not deemed to be respectful to the local traditions are fined and told to leave, and their details are passed on to the respective embassies with a warning that if they are caught doing something like this again, they will be banned from entering the country for a number of years. It certainly seems heavy-handed, and in a picture that was released, the German couple on this occasion seemed to be keeping to themselves and not causing any commotion. Something like this is a common sight in other tourist locations around the world, and this story is the perfect example of how what's appropriate where you live can be viewed completely differently by people from other cultures and customs. That and the people of Venice would probably prefer you paid for an extortionately priced cup of coffee in one of their cafes than bring your own. Number 1. Urinating in the sea. So the saying goes, if the fish do it, then why shouldn't we?
Wait, it's getting warmer. Ah, that is disgusting!
And it seems bizarre that there might be rules to prevent people urinating in the ocean. But in some countries there are, and they're strictly enforced. In 2017, under the cover of darkness, police snuck up on 2 revelers in a North Italian beach who had been caught short and were using the water as a place to relieve themselves. They thought they had picked a discreet place and that no one had seen them, but they realized they were in trouble when, rather than just giving them a warning, the police arrested them under strict sanitation laws with concerns that the area was important to fishermen. They were each given a 3,300 euro fine, which was the equivalent of around $5,000 at the time, and possibly one of the most expensive peas in history. Subscribe to Top 5s for more and check out some of our other popular videos.